are 200,000 cold cases in the United States. They won't be solved with CODIS alone.
On June 11th of 1994, fishermen in a boat in Lake Stickney found a body floating over by the lily pads in the northwest corner area of the lake and reported it to the sheriff's office.
When he was found, he was very decomposed. He was covered in adipocere, which is a thick waxy-like substance that develops in bodies that have been underwater for a significant period of time.
Since he floated to the surface, we determined he was probably weighted down in the lake for a period of time, because that lake has a lot of activity. If he would have been floating around in there for a year, he would have been found a lot sooner.
They did an autopsy shortly after his body was discovered in 1994, and the medical examiner found a gunshot wound to the head. So it was classified from the very beginning as a homicide.
The case ended up getting assigned to Detective Greg Renta, and Greg worked extensively on trying to get the body identified.
They hand searched hundreds of missing persons reports between investigators at the medical examiner's office and detectives with the sheriff's office. They had exhausted hundreds of leads, tips, missing persons reports throughout the years.
They had a composite drawing made of him, of what he might look like, and they provided a description of possibly a white male or a mixed race male, maybe Native American, 5'11", and at least 150 pounds.
Later in 1994, the sheriff's office took the cranium and the mandible to police forensic drawing class where detectives were learning how to do sketches, and 5 different detectives looked at the same skull and made 5 different sketches based on the features that they saw in the skull. The next big push came in 2008 when STR DNA for CODIS became available. And so as soon as that was available, we got an STR profile and got it into CODIS. And he was also entered into NamUs and the DOE network at that point. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office made a deck of cold case playing cards.
Well, initially, we were making up a set of cold case playing cards to put into the prisons in the state of Washington so that we could get tips to try to solve any of them.
In 2015, when we started looking at all of our cases over again and basically starting over from the beginning, we had another forensic reconstruction artist take a look at him, and she saw some features in his skull and mandible that made her think he might have some Black ethnicity or some sort of white with another race admixture. So she drew some drawings based on her interpretation, and those made him look a little bit more Black. I think what we finally decided is we're just going to throw race out of the equation and just look at missing persons report and disregard the race, because it was so confusing.
The Rodney Johnson case is particularly interesting in that the anthropology, various assessments of anthropology had conflicting suggestions. And I believe when the facial reconstruction for that case was performed, they rendered him using all the information that was available. So he was rendered as someone that might be white, someone that might be Black, someone that might have a Hispanic origin, someone that is biracial. They just didn't really know.
In 2018 is when Detective Jim Scharf had heard about investigative genetic genealogy and GEDmatch. So we decided we were going to do that on this case at that point. Our goal was to get about 10 nanograms of DNA for a SNP array. So we'd processed 3 samples. We weren't even close to the 10 nanograms. At that point, we had heard about Othram, and we had heard that they specialize in cases with very small amounts of highly degraded DNA. So we felt this case was perfect for Othram.
We got involved with Snohomish County after his remains had gone through several other methodologies that didn't work out. They didn't yield a good DNA profile for them to figure out who he was. And I think when we got it, we had maybe 180 picograms, 160 picograms, very low amount. It's about 20 cells worth of human DNA. But we were able to successfully build a full DNA profile, and then we were able to share that with investigators up there.
I mean, when you think about what Othram did, they took DNA from a sample that had been submerged in the water for 6 or 7 years, and then sat on a shelf at the medical examiner's office for the next 25 years and got a good DNA profile out of about 20 cells worth of DNA.
Well, it was May 19th of 2020 that Othram provided the kit number to Jane Jorgensen, and she uploaded it to GEDmatch.
The return gave us a 541 centimorgan hit, which is consistent with a first cousin. And so I built ancestor trees back with the help of Jim Scharf from the sheriff's office.
So it actually only took us about 5 days of tree building and running some offline searches through the FBI.
We had good family trees, so we had a good idea who was who in the family, and we had identified the Johnson family line. So Detective Scharf decided that we could call the first cousin match. She turned out to be a genealogist, so she had a lot of good trees out there. And she told us that she knew most of her family, and if we were going to look anywhere, concentrate anywhere looking for missing family members, we should look at the Johnson line, because that was kind of the line that she had lost track of.
Well, as soon as she said Rodney Johnson, I realized that we had a missing person report on a Rodney Johnson, but I was thinking that he was missing under different circumstances that wouldn't fit him ending up in Lake Stickney. So it took an extra day or two to figure out that the Rodney Johnson that was related to her was the Rodney Johnson that we had a missing person report on.
For 26 years, he was only known as John Doe. Now he has a name, and his family has some long-awaited closure.
It's many years later than we would have hoped, but we are very glad we're finally able to identify Rodney and properly return him to his family.
We are asking the public, if they know something, to say something. Our family wants closure and justice for whoever did this to Rodney. His life was snuffed out. He didn't get a chance to live long, or get married, or have children, or be with his family. Please help our family with any information or tips that you have.
This isn't just a job for these folks, these detectives that come to work. They live and breathe this stuff, and it's so impactful to the family members. They spend an incredible amount of time with family, with other investigators. And as long as there's something that we can go on that's valuable, as long as I'm in office, they are going to have my full support.
The first thing that I did was I telephoned Rodney's half-sister, who was the person that had reported him missing. And I ended up talking to her. And from there, it kind of developed into, they had rumors of what might have happened to them. So that kind of put us on a track of where to look for our suspect along those lines. So we're still continuing that investigation. I've been a cold case detective for 16 years. And normally, I could maybe get a case solved 1 or 2 a year if we were lucky. Usually only about one every year and a half on average. So I was getting ready to retire in a year when I learned about genetic genealogy. And at that point, I realized there's no way I'm going to retire next year, because I've got a new tool that's the best tool that's ever been in my toolbox. And I'm going to keep using it until I solve all these cases that I've been wanting to solve for 16 years.
It seems like with the sequencing that they can do, combined with investigative genetic genealogy, there might be a future where there are very few John or Jane Does.